Jenkins squinted at the screen, his face a tapestry of confusion and mild disgust. "You're telling me this is a classic?" He pointed at the hero on screen, clad in a tight silver jumpsuit and yelling incomprehensible alien gibberish. "Lowe, I've seen better acting in a safety briefing." Dr. Lowe chuckled, lounging on the couch with his arms crossed. "You're missing the nuance, Jenkins. The real star of the movie is the alien slug. It's a metaphor for human ambition." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "The slug that explodes after 3 minutes on screen?" "Exactly. It's brilliant. Short, impactful, and doesn't overstay its welcome, unlike you." Jenkins rolled his eyes, tossing a handful of popcorn at Lowe. "Face it, Doc. Your taste is trash." They were holed up in a storage room turned makeshift theater, an unspoken sanctuary where they held their weekly movie ritual. The team had no idea this tradition existed, and Jenkins was determined to keep it that way. He had a reputation to uphold, after all. Tough soldier, stoic badass, not popcorn connoisseur. The screen flickered as the movie transitioned to an overly dramatic slow-motion explosion. Dr. Lowe leaned forward, his face lit with childlike glee. "Look at that practical effects work! They don't make them like this anymore." Jenkins groaned, slouching further in his chair. "No, thank God they don't. If I see one more foam boulder bounce like a beach ball, I'm walking out." "You'd be walking out of your own storage room," Dr. Lowe quipped. Jenkins opened his mouth for a retort when the movie's villain appeared on screen. A mustache-twirling, cape-swirling caricature of evil. Both men fell silent for a beat. Then Jenkins snorted. "You think his cape budget is bigger than the special effects budget?" "No doubt," Dr. Lowe replied, grinning. "But let's not act like you didn't buy that action figure last week." "That was for research," Jenkins shot back, deadpan. "Sure it was." The banter continued as the movie limped toward its over-the-top climax. The villain monologued about world domination, while the hero inexplicably found time to flirt with the leading lady mid-battle. Dr. Lowe shook his head. "You know, this movie might be garbage, but it's entertaining garbage." Jenkins smirked. "That's the first honest thing you've said all night." As the credits rolled, the two sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the flickering light casting shadows on the walls. It was the kind of quiet only good company could provide. "You know," Jenkins said finally, "I don't mind this little tradition of ours, even if your taste in movies is criminal." "High praise," Lowe replied with a mock bow. "Next week, we're doing sci-fi. Hope you're ready for Invasion of the Foam Meteors." Jenkins groaned loudly, but the corners of his mouth twitched upward. Outside, the world of missions, experiments, and unknown dangers waited. But for now, it was just two colleagues, a crappy movie, and a pile of popcorn. Dr. Lowe sat on the overstuffed leather chair, his shoulders tight despite the comfortable surroundings. The office was pristine, with neatly organized bookshelves and a large bay window letting in a soft, natural light. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos he'd been thrown into weeks ago. Across from him, Dr. Schmidt adjusted his glasses, his sharp blue eyes focused but kind. "So Dennis," he began, his German accent adding a subtle weight to his words. "Tell me, how are you actually doing?" Dr. Lowe exhaled, leaning back and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "It's complicated," he admitted. "I mean, I'm here, obviously, but my head's still." He gestured vaguely as if trying to catch an invisible thought. "Still back there, I guess." Dr. Schmidt nodded, clasping his hands together. "Understandable. You'll experience significant trauma, being taken away from your will, isolated, threatened. It leaves a mark. That's putting it mildly, Dr. Lowe smirked, though there was no humor behind it. I keep running through the scenarios in my head, like a bad movie on repeat. Could I have escaped sooner? Could I have stopped any of it? You are not alone in that feeling, Dennis, Dr. Schmidt replied. It is human nature to replay such events, to search for control in a situation where there was none. But hindsight is not the solution. Facing the emotions head-on is. Dr. Lowe looked away, his jaw tightening. Yeah, well, easier said than done. Dr. Schmidt leaned forward slightly, his tone steady. The mission logs describe the conditions vividly. The vampires, the experiments. It reads like science fiction. Yet you lived it. You survived. What do you feel when you think about those moments? Dr. Lowe hesitated, his mind drifting back to the dark corridors, the cold, damp air, and the inhuman snarls echoing around him. Anger, he said finally. And guilt. Not just for myself, but for the team. They were risking their lives to find me. And He stopped, shaking his head. You felt helpless, Dr. Schmidt finished for him. Yeah, Dr. Lowe's voice was very quiet. And I hate that. Dr. Schmidt gave him a moment before speaking again. You are not helpless now. You are here, safe, and you are taking steps to process what happened. That is strength, Dennis, not weakness. Dr. Lowe nodded, though the weight on his chest didn't feel any lighter. I've been trying to stay grounded, you know? Keep my mind busy with routine stuff. Dr. Schmidt's lips curled into a slight smile. Such as? Well, Dr. Lowe allowed himself a small grin. Jenkins and I have this weekly movie night. It's nothing fancy. Just popcorn, terrible movies, and some sarcasm. It's normal. Normalcy is powerful, Dr. Schmidt said. It is a reminder that life continues, even after the extraordinary. Do not underestimate its value. The room fell into a thoughtful silence, broken only by the faint hum of a clock on the wall. As the session wound to a close, Dr. Schmidt leaned back in his chair. Dennis, this is not a sprint. Healing takes time, and that is okay. Keep your movie nights, your routines, and remember, you do not face this alone. Dr. Lowe gave a faint nod, standing and shaking Dr. Schmidt's hand. Thanks, Doc. I'll keep that in mind. He stepped out of the office, the hallway feeling both familiar and foreign. As he reached for his phone to check the time, it buzzed in his hand. Dr. Chang. Hey team, guess who found another anomaly? A question followed by a winky face emoji. Gate room in 20. P.S. Jenkins, try not to look like you're bench pressing the whole mission. LOL. Dr. Lowe chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. Leave it to Chang to keep things interesting. He pocketed the phone, exhaling deeply. Back to work. The faint hum of the portal's energy filled the room as Clayton walked in, bags slung over his shoulder. Jenkins was already leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his face as usual. Dr. Lowe and Dr. Harris were at the prep station, adjusting their equipment while Dr. Thomas meticulously checked the settings on his belt. Clayton took a breath, trying to look composed. All right, let's get ready to roll. Jenkins tilted his head, his grin widening. That's it? That's the big speech? No brave explorers venturing into the unknown? No fortune favors the bold? Clayton dropped his bag on the bench with a thud. You want a speech, Jenkins? Fine. Get your gear ready, or I'll put you in charge. How's that? Terrifying, Jenkins deadpanned, pushing off the wall. But seriously, a little razzle-dazzle never hurts. He tapped his temple as he passed. Inspiration, you know? Noted, Clayton replied with a wry smile. At the prep station, Dr. Lowe glanced up. Does anyone else find it weird how Jenkins is suddenly the expert on leadership? Or is that just me? Hey, Jenkins shot back, strapping on his harness. I've experienced enough military missions to know how this works. And for the record, if it were a movie, I'd be the sarcastic guy who saves the day. Or the first one to get eaten, Dr. Harris muttered under her breath, earning a snort from Dr. Thomas. Clayton chuckled despite himself, shaking his head. All right, gear up. We'll save the Oscar nominations for later. As the team got to work, Clayton found himself lingering near Jenkins. So, he said quietly, what would you say is the key to, not looking like I'm making it up as I go? Jenkins gave him a sidelong glance, his expression softer than usual. Clay, nobody's expecting you to be perfect. Just keep us moving, keep us alive, and don't be afraid to listen. Oh, and a sense of humor helps too. Right, Clayton said, nodding. Keep moving, keep alive, crack jokes, got it. See? You're a natural, Jenkins said, clapping him on the shoulder. The hum of the portal grew louder as Dr. Chang's voice crackled over the intercom. Everything's stable on my end. Anomalies locked in. Gates prepped, and you're good to go. Clayton turned to the rest of the team. Last checks. Anything missing? Other than a world where nothing tries to kill us? Dr. Lowe quipped. Doesn't exist, Dr. Harris replied, snapping her pack shut. Dr. Thomas glanced up from his equipment. I'm good. All right, Clayton said, stepping toward the gate. The staticky energy reflected in his eyes, and he paused, taking one more look at his team. Let's see what's waiting for us on the other side. As he stepped into the light, Jenkins muttered just loud enough for him to hear. That's better. You're learning, Chief. One by one, the team followed, their figures swallowed by the fuzzy vortex. The gate shimmered behind them, vanishing into nothingness as the team stepped into a damp alleyway. The city's night air was thick with the mingling scent of garbage and gas, a far cry from anything resembling peace. Shadows stretched long under the flickering streetlights, barely illuminating their surroundings. Well, this is cozy, Jenkins muttered, gripping his rifle as his eyes scanned the alley. I think I've seen this place in a low-budget horror flick. Clayton adjusted his gear, his gaze darting around the unfamiliar environment. Keep it tight, everyone. Let's get our bearings first. Dr. Harris shivered, the chill of the night gnawing through her jacket. Is it just me? Or does this place have a distinct don't linger here too long vibe? Before anyone could respond, distant shouts and the sound of smashing bottles erupted from around the corner. The noise was erratic, like a mosh pit. Jenkins tilted his head toward the commotion. Sounds like a party. Should we crash it? Careful what you wish for, Dr. Thomas replied, tightening the straps on his pack. Let's move, but stay alert. The team inched forward. The alley stretched into a larger, open area where two groups of men clashed violently. Shouts turned to snarls as fists met flesh, and something caught Dr. Lowe's eye. Is it me? He whispered. Or does that guy have claws? All heads turned as one of the brawlers, shirtless and towering over his peers, slashed a rival gang member across the chest with fingers that extended in razor-sharp talons. Blood sprayed against the brick walls, and the wounded man crumpled, groaning in pain. Confirmed, Jenkins said grimly. The fight escalated. Another figure, lean and fast, darted through the chaos with feline grace, landing a vicious kick to the opponent's head before bounding onto a nearby dumpster. His slit-like pupils reflecting the dim light as he let out an eerie hiss. "What the hell are we looking at?" Dr. Thomas breathed, his hand resting on his holstered sidearm. "I don't know," Clayton said, his voice low but steady. "But we're not equipped to jump into this without a plan. Stay back and observe for now." But their presence hadn't gone unnoticed. A hulking figure, its skin mottled with scales, turned its head sharply toward them. Its reptilian eyes locked onto the team as it growled something unintelligible to its comrades. "Uh-oh," Dr. Harris said, gripping her scanner tightly. "We've been made." The scaled gang leader stomped forward, its heavy tail dragging behind. "Outsiders!" It snarled, its voice low and guttural. "You picked the wrong night to wander in here." "Technically," Jenkins said dryly, raising his weapon, "we didn't pick anything." "Move!" Clayton barked as the reptilian charged. Its claws swiped through the air with alarming speed. The alley erupted into chaos. Dr. Lowe ducked behind a pile of crates as Jenkins fired a warning shot into the air, causing several gang members to scatter. Clayton and Dr. Thomas worked in tandem, covering each other as the reptilian leader lunged toward them. "Keep your distance!" Clayton shouted, dodging a clawed swipe. "We don't know what they're capable of!" Another altered gang member, this one with dog-like features, elongated snout, fur-covered arms, rushed Dr. Harris, who scrambled to use her scanner as a makeshift weapon. She swung it at the creature's head, connecting with a dull thud that made it yelp and retreat. Jenkins, ever the strategist, flanked the reptilian leader, landing a well-placed shot in its leg. It roared in pain, collapsing to one knee but still menacing the team with snapping jaws. "Down but not out," Jenkins muttered. "Lovely." As the fight raged on, one of the fleeing gang members shouted over his shoulder, "You're messing with the wrong people! The serum isn't for you!" Clayton caught the words, even as he ducked a wild swing. "Serum?" he repeated under his breath. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the gang began retreating. The altered ones covered their exit, snarling and snapping, before vanishing into the labyrinth of alleys. The team regrouped, breathing heavily but unharmed. "Well, that was fun," Dr. Lowe said, brushing dirt from his coat. "Anyone else feel like we missed the memo on this place?" Clayton glanced in the direction the gang had fled. They said something about a serum. We need answers. "And we need to figure out why the hell people here have tails and claws," Jenkins added. "Let's keep moving," Clayton said, leading the team out of the alley. This world just got a lot more interesting, and a lot more dangerous. Clayton's boots crunched on the cracked pavement as the team huddled in the shadows of a narrow alley. The air was stagnant, tinged with the sour smell of decay and burnt rubber. Around them, the muffled hum of city life pulsed. Distant shouting, the faint rumbling of passing vehicles, and the occasional bark of a stray dog. "We can't keep moving around like this," Jenkins said, gesturing to their tactical gear. "We're screaming off-worlders to anyone paying attention." "He's right," Dr. Harris agreed, checking her sidearm. "We've already had one welcoming party. Let's not invite another." Clayton frowned, glancing at their packs slung low to keep mobility tight. "Did we bring anything that won't make us look like a combat squad?" Dr. Lowe rummaged through his bag, pulling out a bundled cloak. "Just these," he said, tossing one to Clayton. "Not perfect, but they'll help." The team quickly donned the plain, tattered cloaks. They hung loosely over their gear, enough to hide their weapons and armor while blending into the rough surroundings. "Not bad," Jenkins said, pulling the hood low over his face. "Kinda feels like I'm auditioning for a post-apocalyptic drama, though." "Focus," Clayton said. Let's find somewhere to regroup and get our bearings. As they stepped out of the alley, the city unfolded before them. Neon signs buzzed above shattered shops, and graffiti plastered every visible surface. Groups of people loitered on the street corners, their eyes tracking the team with thinly veiled suspicion. Dr. Harris stopped abruptly, nudging Clayton. "Over there," she said, pointing to a rusted newspaper stand half buried under old flyers and trash. The team approached cautiously. Jenkins scanned the area, his rifle hidden but ready, as Clayton pulled a folded newspaper from the pile. The headline was stark, the bold letters catching the dim light. "Another altered riot. Authorities scramble as tensions escalate." "Altered?" Clayton murmured, reading further. "They're talking about those gang members we saw, the ones with claws and tails." "Looks like it's not just gangs," Dr. Thomas added, leaning over his shoulder with growing interest. "This says that the procedures are spreading through black markets, creating all kinds of mutations." "Fascinating." Dr. Harris raised a brow. "Fascinating isn't the word I'd use. It's biology taken to the extreme," Dr. Thomas said, unable to hide his enthusiasm. "Animal traits grafted into humans? Think of the implications. Speed, strength, heightened senses." "Or grotesque mutations," Dr. Harris countered. Dr. Lowe chimed in. "This kind of thing rarely ends well. Improper DNA splicing, it's not something you play around with." Jenkins let out a low whistle. "So, we've got a city full of people splicing themselves with animal DNA. Some professionally done, others not so much." "It explains the gang hierarchy," Dr. Harris said. "The leaders get the enhancements, the grunts stay as muscle." Clayton folded a newspaper under his arm. "Let's move. We're not going to figure this out standing in the open." As they walked, the city revealed more of its fractured personality. A street vendor called out to passerbys, selling grilled skewers under a flickering light. In an alley to the left, two men argued in hushed tones, their voices rising just enough to hint at a deal gone sour. Further down, a child darted between shadows, clutching something metallic close to his chest. "This place feels ready to implode," Dr. Lowe said quietly. "It's already mid-implosion," Jenkins replied. The team paused in a small courtyard, its centerpiece a broken fountain now serving as a makeshift shelter for someone long gone. Clayton pulled out his recorder, glancing around before speaking. "Log report. First entry for this anomaly. It's a sprawling urban landscape, clearly divided by class and technology. Signs of widespread use of animal DNA enhancements, but the results seem unstable. Gang conflicts appear to be the immediate threat. Current priority is gathering more intel." He slid the recorder back into his pocket just as a shout echoed from a nearby building. A man burst out of the doorway, clutching his arm as blood dripped from his sleeve. Behind him, a gang member with sharp, canine-like teeth snarled, stepped into the light. "Stay alert," Jenkins said, his hand already on his rifle. Dr. Lowe moved forward immediately, crouching next to the injured man. "I've got him. Cover me." The man was pale and trembling, his breathing shallow. "Easy," Dr. Lowe said, his voice calm. "What happened?" "Altered," the man rasped. "They're taking over the docks." His eyes fluttered shut as he passed out. Dr. Lowe checked his pulse and nodded. "He's stable, but barely. I don't think he'll last long without real care." Clayton exchanged a glance with Jenkins. "The docks," he said. "That's a lead." Jenkins nodded. "And it sounds like we're not done with these altered folks just yet." The tension in the air was palpable as the team lingered in the shadows of a crumbling courtyard wall. Somewhere in the distance, the low whine of a police siren crept closer, mingling with the muted chaos of the city. "Stay casual," Clayton muttered, pulling his hood lower. Casual? Jenkins scoffed. Might as well ask me to grow wings. Footsteps rounded the corner before Clayton could respond, and two uniformed officers emerged. Both were wearing navy blue jackets emblazoned with Philadelphia City Police Department over tactical vests. Their hands hovered near their weapons, eyes sharp as they scanned the group. You! The lead officer barked, narrowing his gaze at Clayton. What's going on here? We got reports of a fight. Clayton stepped forward slowly, keeping his hands visible. Not much to tell, he said evenly. We heard shouting nearby, saw someone injured, and moved to help. Whoever caused the trouble is long gone. The second officer's eyes flickered to Dr. Lowe, who was still crouching beside the unconscious man. Found him like this, Dr. Lowe said without looking up. Tried to stabilize him, but he's in bad shape. The lead officer grunted, his suspicion evident. He turned to his partner. Call it in. Get an ambulance over here. The second officer nodded, stepping back to his radio. A clipped exchange followed, confirming the request for medical assistance. The lead officer's focus returned to the group. You don't exactly look like good Samaritans. Jenkins bristled, but Clayton cut him off with a slight gesture. We're just passing through, Clayton said calmly. But if you're looking for troublemakers, you might want to check the docks. That's where the injured man said his attackers were heading. The officer's brow furrowed. His posture stiffened. The docks. You sure? Clayton nodded. His words, not ours. Sounds like there's something big going on over there. The officers exchanged a glance before the lead one sighed. Fine. We'll check it out. But don't let us catch you wandering around like this again. They turned and strode off toward their squad car, the faint crackle of radio chatter following them. As soon as the coast was clear, Jenkins let out a low whistle. Smooth. Didn't know you had it in you, Chief. Let's not make a habit of close calls, Clayton replied, tugging at the hood of his cloak. We're not here to get involved, remember? Dr. Harris folded her arms. But what's the plan? We can't just wander around aimlessly. Clayton pulled the crumpled newspaper from earlier out of his cloak. We stick to observation. We're here to gather intel, not fix this place's problems. I still don't like leaving someone like him, Dr. Lowe muttered, glancing at the injured man. You did what you could, Clayton said at the sound of the ambulance blaring in the distance. Let's keep moving before we attract any more attention. The team moved deeper into the city, sticking to the side streets and alleys as they navigated Philly's labyrinth of urban decay. The newspaper had been vague on details, but every corner they turned seemed to reinforce the fractured state of this world. Graffiti in defiant colors marked gang territories, with snarling animals painted alongside cryptic symbols. Trash and broken glass littered the sidewalks, and the occasional shadow of a figure slipping between buildings reminded them how alive the night was. Feels like the whole place is teetering on the edge, Dr. Thomas mused, his eyes darting to a nearby wall where a crude mural depicted a lion-like figure towering over small silhouettes. It's not just teetering, Jenkins replied grimly. It's already fallen. They just don't realize it yet. The team turned a corner and found themselves in a narrow alley with flickering neon signs above closed shops. A faint noise drew their attention. A low growl, followed by heavy footsteps. Clayton raised a hand, signaling for the group to stop. Jenkins, take point. Everyone else, stay sharp. Jenkins moved ahead, his rifle low but ready. He peered around the next corner and then gestured for the team to follow. Just a couple of gang members, he whispered. Altered, but they're distracted. The group crept closer, staying hidden in the shadows. The two gang members were arguing in hushed tones, their figures partially illuminated by a buzzing street lamp. One had thick, clawed hands and elongated arms that twitched with each gesture. The other's face was more animal than human, with feline features and glowing amber eyes. "Hybrids," Dr. Thomas murmured, his fascination evident. "They're more integrated than I expected. Look at those claws. They're functional, not just aesthetic." "Keep your voice down," Clayton hissed. Dr. Harris nudged Dr. Lowe. "And you wanted to help these people," she whispered. "Mutation or not, they're still people," Dr. Lowe replied softly. The argument between the gang members escalated, and the feline-like one shoved the other against the wall with a snarl. "Let's move before they notice us," Clayton said, pulling his hood tighter. The team slipped past the alley, keeping to the shadows as the growls and shouts faded behind them. Once they were clear, Clayton pulled out his recorder. "Log update. Police presence confirms a city-wide issue with gang-related activity involving enhanced individuals, referred to here as altered. Observed clear signs of genetic splicing with animal traits, though quality appears inconsistent. Gang hierarchy likely determined by the success of these procedures. Continuing to gather intel while avoiding direct conflict." As they pushed deeper into the city, the night seemed to grow heavier, the air thicker with tension. The hum of activity in the streets reached a fever pitch as the team approached the city center. The towering structure of the Biogenica Splicing Advancement Center loomed above the skyline, its sleek glass facade illuminated by blue neon strips. A crowd had gathered in front of the facility, their chants echoing in the cold night air. Placards and banners waved in the light breeze, bearing slogans like "Nature, not abomination," and "Splicing is sin." A group of protesters, led by a man in a priest's collar, held candles and raised their voices in fervent objection. "This must be the epicenter," Dr. Harris said, keeping her voice low. "The protest, the facility, it all fits." Jenkins frowned, scanning the scene. "You can bet the gangs are watching this place, too. Prime target for anyone wanting to make a statement." As if on cue, a loud crash shattered the tense air. Screams erupted as a black van barreled through the protest line, scattering people in every direction. The van skidded to a stop near the front entrance of the splicing facility, and armed gang members poured out. "Altered," Jenkins muttered, his grip tightening on his rifle. Clayton observed the scene with a furrowed brow. The gang leader, a towering figure with wolf-like features and glowing red eyes, barked orders. Behind him, other gang members, each showing various signs of crude splicing, rushed toward the facility's glass doors. "We're not supposed to interfere," Dr. Harris reminded, though her tone wavered. "They'll slaughter anyone inside," Dr. Lowe said, his face set in anger. Clayton hesitated, the weight of leadership pressing down on him. But as gunfire erupted and the gang shattered the glass doors, the decision became clear. "We can't just stand here," Clayton said firmly. "Jenkins, take point. Dr. Lowe, stay back unless someone's hurt. Dr. Thomas, Dr. Harris, stay sharp." They moved quickly, using the chaos as cover. The gang had already breached the lobby, dragging terrified security guards out of their way. The wolf-like leader stood in the center of the carnage, issuing commands as his subordinates smashed equipment and loaded bags with stolen serums. Jenkins took aim and fired a controlled burst, hitting one of the gang members in the leg. The man crumpled with a howl, his elongated arms flailing. The gang turned their attention to the team. "Suppressive fire!" Clayton ordered, his pistol barking as he targeted a gang member with jaguar-like spots and fangs. Jenkins moved with precision, his rifle keeping the gang pinned down. Dr. Harris and Dr. Thomas took cover behind a shattered reception desk, returning fire as needed. One of the gang members, a hulking figure with rhino-like skin, charged at Jenkins, shrugging off the smaller rounds. Jenkins dove aside, rolling to his feet and emptying his rifle into the gang member's leg. The brute collapsed, roaring in pain. Meanwhile, Dr. Lowe rushed to a fallen security guard, dragging him behind cover. "You'll live," he muttered, applying pressure to a bleeding wound. Clayton found himself face to face with the wolf-like leader. The gang leader growled, his red eyes blazing as he lunged. Clayton barely dodged the swipe of razor-sharp claws, stumbling back and firing his pistol. The bullets grazed the leader's arm, but it wasn't enough to slow him down. "Jenkins!" Clayton shouted, struggling to keep the leader at bay. Jenkins turned and fired a well-placed shot, hitting the leader in the shoulder. The wolf-like man staggered, giving Clayton enough time to land a solid blow with the butt of his pistol. The leader crumpled to the floor, unconscious. As the dust settled, the team regrouped. Dr. Lowe had a cut above his eyebrow, and Jenkins was nursing a bruised shoulder, but they were alive. Dr. Thomas crouched near a shattered crate, his eyes scanning the spilled contents. He picked up a small bag filled with vials of glowing green serum, his expression unreadable. "What's that?" Dr. Harris asked, approaching cautiously. "Looks like the real deal," Dr. Thomas said, holding it up. "Pure splicing serum." Before anyone could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. The same officers from earlier burst into the facility, guns drawn. "Freeze! Hands where I can see them!" The lead officer shouted, his gaze darting from the unconscious gang members to the heavily armed team. Clayton raised his hands slowly, his mind racing for an explanation. Dr. Thomas, still holding the bag of serum, looked up at the officer. "We just stopped them from taking this." The officer's eyes narrowed. "You seem to be in the center of even more trouble. Now who exactly are you?" The room fell silent as the team exchanged glances. "Guess we've got some explaining to do," Clayton muttered under his breath. The city name was prominently displayed above the reception desk of the precinct. "Welcome to Philadelphia Police Department, 4th District." Clayton's eyes scanned the room as they were ushered inside, their equipment slung over their backs and drawing more attention than he'd liked. A few uniformed officers eyed the group suspiciously, and a grizzled detective with a coffee-stained tie stepped forward. "I'm Detective Salgado," he said curtly, gesturing to a series of benches. "Sit tight. We'll get to you one at a time." "Looks like we're getting a full VIP treatment," Jenkins muttered as they took their seats in the fluorescent-lit waiting area. Dr. Harris sat stiffly. "Can we focus on what we'll say? I doubt we're just passing through. We'll cut it." Dr. Thomas adjusted his glasses, glancing toward the wall-mounted TV. "We should keep it vague. Our gear is for research. We were in the area, and..." The TV blared in the background, cutting him off. A brightly dressed news anchor spoke with animation, images of a stadium and spliced athletes flashing behind him. "The debate continues. Should altereds have their own Olympic Games? Critics argue that enhanced abilities of spliced individuals give them an unfair advantage in human-only events. Meanwhile, supporters are pushing for dedicated competitions, comparing potential events to a real-world Ninja Warrior League." Clayton leaned back, crossing his arms. "So how do we spin this? We stumbled into a facility to stop a gang war and what? Hope they just let us go?" Dr. Lowe shrugged. "I say we stick to the truth. We helped prevent a theft and save some lives. If they have a problem with that, tough." The detective returned, eyeing their holstered weapons. "You don't look like your average Samaritans. What's the deal with all the hardware?" Before Clayton could respond, Jenkins jumped in. "Research. Self-defense is kind of necessary when your field work involves volatile subjects." Salgado raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Field work, huh? You're carrying military-grade pistols and tactical armor for field work?" Dr. Harris sighed. pulling out a small, nondescript card from her inner pocket. "Detective, if you plan to charge or detain us, you'll need to consult this first." She handed it to him calmly. Salgado took the card, his skepticism evident. As he read the contents, his expression changed, shifting from annoyance to begrudging respect. Without a word, he handed it back and motioned to another officer. "You're free to go, for now. But I'd watch my step if I were you. This city's on edge, and folks like you tend to cause ripples." As they gathered their things, Jenkins smirked. "I gotta know, what's on that card?" Dr. Harris smiled faintly, slipping it back into her pocket. "You're better off not knowing." Clayton led the way out, muttering, "Well, that could have gone worse." As they stepped outside, the cold night air greeted them, the streets alive with distant sirens and the hum of a restless city. But Clayton couldn't shake the feeling that their brief brush with authority wouldn't be their last. The team moved cautiously through the dimly lit streets of Philadelphia. The precinct was behind them, but the tension lingered. Clayton kept a steady pace, his eyes darting to every shadow. The others followed, their gear tucked away as best as possible to avoid attracting unwanted attention. "Would it kill this city to have one quiet alley?" Jenkins muttered, stepping over a pile of trash. Dr. Thomas glanced at a street map on his device. "We're not far from the edge of the district. If we keep moving, we should find somewhere quieter." The sound of an engine echoed in the narrow street ahead. A large white van appeared, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Clayton stopped in his tracks, his hands instinctively moving to his sidearm. The van slowed to a stop, the logo on its side unmistakable: Biogenica Splicing Advancement Center. The passenger window rolled down, and a sharply dressed man in his mid-40s leaned out. "You're a hard group to find. The director would like a word." Clayton exchanged glances with Jenkins, who shrugged. "We've been through worse. And we're still armed," Dr. Lowe added quietly, though his tone carried no real comfort. The side door of the van slid open, revealing a spacious interior. The man gestured inside. "Please, it's a short drive. Consider it a thank you for what you did earlier." Clayton hesitated but finally nodded. "All right, but if this goes sideways, remember, you insisted." The ride was quiet but tense. The driver and the man who'd spoken earlier seemed unfazed by the team's guarded demeanor. Within minutes, the van pulled into the driveway of a sprawling brownstone nestled in a quiet neighborhood far removed from the chaos of downtown. As they disembarked, the man gestured towards the entrance. "The director's waiting inside. You'll find it comfortable here for the night." The team stepped into a warmly lit foyer, its polished hardwood floors and elegant furniture contrasting sharply with the harsh streets they'd been navigating. A middle-aged woman with silver hair entered, her tailored suit exuding authority. "Welcome," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "I'm Director Evelyn Marks. You've done us a great service tonight, and I wanted to personally thank you." Clayton stepped forward cautiously. "We were just in the wrong place at the right time. No need for formalities." "Perhaps, but the facility you saved is critical, and your actions prevented significant loss, not just to us, but to the city. Please consider this home base for as long as you need." The team was shown to a set of guest rooms on the second floor, each furnished with modern comforts that felt almost alien after the gritty streets and police station. As they settled in, Clayton pulled out his recorder. He sat on the edge of the bed, the faint hum of the room's heater a comforting backdrop. Log entry. This world is complicated. It's clear now that splicing isn't just a niche enhancement. It's a way of life here, but one that carries a heavy cost. We've seen the chaos it causes in the streets and the pushback from people clinging to unaltered humanity. It's not our place to interfere, but I can't help but wonder how much longer this fragile balance can hold. For now, we regroup and prepare for what's next. Down the hall, Jenkins leaned against the doorframe of Dr. Harris's room. So, about that card, care to explain what kind of magic trick you pulled back at the station? Dr. Harris didn't even look up from unpacking her bag. Nope. Come on, Jenkins pressed, grinning. You gotta give me something. A secret handshake, a decoder ring, some high-ranking pen pal? She finally looked at him, a small smirk tugging at her lips. Jenkins, if I told you, I'd have to kill you. And honestly, you're too much fun to mess with. Jenkins laughed, throwing up his hands in surrender. All right. Keep your secrets, Dr. Bond. As the banter faded and the house grew quiet, the team finally had a chance to breathe. For the first time since stepping through the gate, they felt a sliver of normalcy. But even as they rested, an unspoken question hung in the air. How long could they stay out of the storm brewing around them? Clayton glanced down at the frequency belt lying on his bag, its faint hum searching for the match of this world's anomalous signature. He knew the belt was their only lifeline, steadily calibrating to the vibrational essence of this parallel world. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the sizzling of bacon filling the air as the team gathered around the small dining table. For once, the tension seemed to have dissipated, replaced by the clinking of silverware and light banter. Jenkins was in the middle of explaining why Die Hard was objectively the greatest action movie of all time. It's not just an action movie, it's a Christmas movie, he argued, gesturing with a fork loaded with scrambled eggs. Dr. Harris rolled her eyes. For the last time, Die Hard isn't about Christmas. It's about blowing things up. That's what makes it perfect for the holidays, Jenkins countered, grinning. Clayton chuckled softly, sipping his coffee. For the first time since stepping into the world, the team felt human again. Then came the crash. A deafening explosion rocked the house, shattering the windows and throwing the team off their chairs. Plates clattered to the ground, and the smell of smoke and burning wood replaced the warm aroma of breakfast. Clayton was the first to recover, scrambling to his feet and reaching for his sidearm. Everyone, get down! Before anyone could fully process what was happening, the front door burst open, and a group of heavily armed gang members poured into the room. They weren't just street thugs. They were the altered, their spliced DNA evident in the animalistic traits etched into their bodies. A hulking figure with jaguar-like spots and elongated claws snarled, his voice guttural.
You think you can mess with our territory and walk away?
Jenkins was already returning fire, his assault rifle barking as he took cover behind the overturned table. Dr. Lowe dragged Dr. Harris through the kitchen, shouting, "Find cover!" The house turned into a battlefield as the gang unleashed their full force, throwing smoke bombs and smashing through walls. Clayton barked orders, but the chaos drowned out his voice. His belt buzzed, a faint whirring sound that drew his attention. He glanced down and noticed it was in his bag and not around his waist. Of all the times to be unprepared, he thought, panic rising in his chest. "Jenkins, cover me!" Clayton shouted, darting toward the hallway where his bag was stashed. He needed to check the belt, but there wasn't time to explain. "Make it quick, Chief!" Jenkins yelled, laying down suppressive fire. Dr. Harris and Dr. Thomas worked together to create a makeshift barricade, but it was clear they were outmatched. One of the gang members, a wiry man with reptilian eyes and unnervingly fast movements, slithered past the defense and lunged at Dr. Lowe. With a grunt, Dr. Lowe grabbed a broken chair leg and swung it, connecting with the man's jaw and sending him sprawling. "Stay down!" he growled, his usual calm demeanor replaced by raw determination. Clayton managed to reach his bag, fumbling with the belt's interface. The warning light flickered more intensely, and the readout displayed garbled texts. Something was wrong. Seriously wrong. "Clayton!" Dr. Harris's voice cut through the chaos. He looked up to see her pointing toward the back door, where a second wave of gang members was breaching. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a full-scale assault. The house was a war zone. Gunfire, shouts, and the constant clash of altered bodies filled the air. Clayton's mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence, that this gang knew exactly where they were, and the timing was too perfect. "Everyone, fall back to the back door!" Clayton shouted, his voice hoarse over the cacophony. He sprinted toward the kitchen, grabbing Dr. Harris by the arm and pulling her toward the exit. Dr. Lowe and Dr. Thomas were already on the move, but as Clayton glanced over his shoulder, he saw Jenkins fighting tooth and nail to hold back the advancing horde. He was unrelenting, his assault rifle emptying rounds with deadly precision. But the altered were too many, too strong. "We can't keep this up!" Jenkins yelled as the jaguar-spliced brute charged forward, claws slashing. "Move it!" As Clayton reached the door, he looked back just in time to see Dr. Lowe tackle a snake-like gang member to the ground. But it was too late. Another wave of gang members poured through the back, cutting off their escape. Clayton's heart hammered in his chest. He motioned for the team to follow him into the basement, knowing it was their only chance. "Now! Move! Move!" But as they descended into the shadows, a sudden loud crack filled the air. A doorframe splintered, and through the dust and chaos, the unmistakable silhouette of their worst nightmare emerged. The leader of the gang, the one who had led the assault earlier, stepped forward, his hulking, mutated form towering over the rest.
"Did you really think you could run from me?"
He growled, a deep, guttural voice that made the air itself vibrate. His eyes glowed an eerie yellow, the jaguar traits on his body more pronounced than ever. The team was concerned. Clayton's heart sank. He could feel the pressure building. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was about to become something far worse. And then, the belt, the one that had been malfunctioning all this time, it flared to life. The warning light blinked wildly, and Clayton's head snapped down to the readout. Suddenly, the world around him began to ripple, everything blurring, vibrating with a strange, painful intensity. "What the hell is happening?" Dr. Harris gasped, clutching her ears as the sound grew unbearable. Clayton's breath caught in his throat. I don't know. This shouldn't be possible. It's too soon." Then, with a deafening crack, the world shattered. The ground beneath them splintered open, and a bright, blinding light flooded the room, swallowing everything in its path. As the team was consumed by the light, the last thing Clayton saw before the world went completely white was the jaguar-spliced gang leader lunging at him, his claws outstretched. Then, everything went dark. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening. This story went off the rails and right into a second part, which I couldn't be happier. This story spread out into 2 parts because in the first part I didn't want to wrap it up with only 1,000 words left. It seemed like it would be too rushed. So I decided to extend it and have the AI help me out with a cliffhanger that will set it up for the second part. I never would have thought of the cliffhanger being the belt malfunctioning after being damaged in a battle. That was something that was not in my head. And I love that the AI picked up on that, and we ran with it, and I tweaked the script a little bit at the end. And unfortunately, sounding like a broken record, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It is the lifeblood of our channels. And by our, I mean all of us creatives out there. And of course, share my stories with your friends. I also have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you'd like to contribute to my creative process. It is much appreciated if you do. And don't forget, I am also on Rumble as well as YouTube. And remember, it's okay to be scary. I am too. Embrace the strange, embrace creativity, embrace the possibilities. And I will see you in the next chapter.